draw it anymore? But I practiced for so long. What you've just witnessed is the horrible tragedy of learning how to draw and then forgetting. Now, in order to prevent this tragic event from happening to you, you might want to check this out. So a lot of people think that the reason why they're not getting any better at making art is because they're not practicing enough or that they're untalented or something. But that's not likely the actual reason. What's really happening is that you're probably not giving your brain a fair shot at learning. So what you're going to need to fix that are these 3 things. So the first thing you need is focus, which is all about cutting out excessive distraction and avoiding procrastination, which is of course easier said than done, but it's important because focus increases your odds of processing the information you're learning well. And I'll give you 3 tips about how you can manage focus. So the first is that you can alter your environment to create one in which you learn better. This really depends on your personal preferences, but you can try things like removing noise or adding music, putting your phone far, far away, or leaving your drawing supplies within sight. You just gotta take note of what environment you're most productive in and recreate that when you study. You can also make sure that your learning materials and learning strategies fit your favorite concentration style. What I personally do is that I combine reading books with YouTube videos, but for some people courses work better, so just pick whatever suits you. And the third tip is that you can try clearing your mind, because constantly dealing with negative thoughts or feelings is going to make focusing a lot harder. Another pointer I have for you is about your surroundings. So when you're doing complex tasks like learning a new concept, you want to do it in an environment with fewer stimuli. That way your mind is relaxed enough to take in new information. But when you're doing simple activities that require energy, like finding reference images or doing gesture drawings, you can do them in environments with lots of stimuli. Okay, so that helps you take care of the concentration bit, but for the procrastination bit, you could use methods that help you resist the impulse. You could set a timer for just 5 minutes and tell yourself to properly focus just for those 5 minutes. And then when you've achieved that, you can keep increasing the time a little bit. You could also try setting deadlines for yourself or getting a study buddy for accountability. Or you could also use a Pomodoro timer. You can schedule tasks for yourself in your planners. There's all sorts of things you can do. But it's really all about resisting the impulse to procrastinate to begin with. Now you're going to be able to set yourself up for better focus. But you don't always need to bring super focus to your learning process. It's more about giving your task the right amount of focus, rather than always being super focused. And also, if you're not getting enough sleep, you might want to focus on fixing that first, because sleep is really important for your brain. This right here is probably the main reason why most artists struggle the way that they do. You're just struggling in the wrong ways. I've definitely been there though, but it's really easy to convince yourself you've mastered something sufficiently. But it's also a great way to end up stuck and not improving. That's just you keeping yourself from learning, and we can't have that. Now, can we? Comprehension or understanding is super important because it allows you to understand how your knowledge applies in different situations. If you can get a detailed understanding of the ideas and principles in art, you'll also be able to build intuition, speed, and proficiency. And I'm going to show you some ways to achieve this deeper understanding. Number 1, force yourself to struggle with a new concept for a bit when you come across a difficult problem. Like set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes and commit to working on the problem for at the very least that amount of time. Number 2, ask yourself if you understand what you're learning well enough to explain to someone else how it works. Like I mentioned earlier, people tend to think they understand something in depth when they don't. That's called the illusion of explanatory depth. So to prevent falling in that trap, you gotta ask yourself if you understand the material well enough to teach it to others. Better yet, go find someone you can try explaining the concepts you're learning to. Now, if you can't find anyone, you can also use the Feynman technique. You can start by writing or drawing an explanation of the concept as if the person who might read it has no prior knowledge of the subject. And while you're doing that, you want to pause when you feel that you can't give a clear explanation. That's when you go back to your learning materials and find out what's missing, and then study that a little bit more. And then you rinse and repeat as necessary. So this technique is all about knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. So it forces you to slow down a little bit so you can't fool yourself into thinking you understand something well when you don't. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's very much worth it. It's very, very, very much worth it. Number 3 is deepen your understanding by connecting the abstract information you came across to concrete examples. When the examples are connected to your personal interests and experiences, you're going to have a much easier time remembering them. Number 4 is examining multiple examples or problems at once. You can compare them and try to find common threads that allow you to see the underlying principles or rules. And once you've found those, you can connect them with prior relevant knowledge you already have. The beautiful thing is that when you do that well, you'll end up with a very fluid skill set. Okay, so focus is important, understanding is important. Now what? Now you just gotta remember what you've learned. All of the good knowledge should go into your long-term memory and stay there. Going through all that effort is only worth it if your new knowledge sticks with you so you can use it. We don't have time to waste, so let's make sure that our efforts weren't in vain. An important thing to remember is that the harder your brain has to work to retrieve information, the more firmly it cements that information in your memory. So that's why if you recall information from memory alone, instead of by reviewing your materials in the meantime, you'll retain the information better. You can see if you've really got it by using generative methods such as self-testing. What you do is you ask yourself questions and give yourself problems to solve. And like I mentioned earlier, the information will be committed to your memory much more strongly than if you were to only use passive learning techniques like rereading. So this doesn't only boost how long you remember stuff, but it also boosts how much of the information you're able to recall. So that's great. And realistically, it's also a lot closer to real life situations. So it's helpful to be able to do this. You don't want to have to grab your learning materials every time you want to use your art skills. Trust me. There's one important thing to remember though. You gotta regularly recall. But when you do that, you want to give yourself some time between studying and active recalling. So you gotta delay your retrieval practice a bit. Doing that will make recalling a little bit more difficult, which we want. But it also improves retention if you're indeed able to recall the information then. You might feel like this is a little too time consuming, but it will save you time in the long run, so just do it anyway. You also have to be a bit careful about not delaying too much though, because then the forgetting curve will mess you up. But once you achieve proficiency, you only have to practice semi-regularly to refresh your memory. Another thing to look out for though is that you need corrective feedback so you don't start remembering things wrong. So when you've recalled some stuff, make sure that it's accurate and correct. You also want to do that with a slight delay though, so you don't start using it as a crutch. And also, like I mentioned earlier, getting enough sleep is going to make this process much more effective. Sleep is important. You can also improve recall by overlearning, which is basically practicing stuff a little bit more than is necessary to achieve proficiency. So overlearning even by just a small amount results in 1 to 2 weeks of extra recall. You can overlearn by selecting a simple task, practicing it until you're able to do it correctly once, and then practicing it multiple times after that. But don't let it slip into mindless repetition though, because that's when you're going to stagnate. You can also deal with that by increasing the level of difficulty of the skill that you're practicing. So in short, improve recall by learning over spaced out time periods. Experiment to find the right intervals while balancing efficiency and retention, and mitigate the forgetting curve by choosing good intervals. So spaced repetition systems work best with question and answer situations. For example, if you're trying to learn the names of specific bones in the body, you can use spaced repetition. But for skills, you could space out mini projects to refresh your memory. Just give yourself a little assignment in which you, for example, have to create a setting on which perspective is applied correctly. In a nutshell, 3 of the most important but underrated skills for artists that want to level up their skills are focusing, understanding, and remembering. Focus is about cutting out excessive distraction and avoiding procrastination. Understanding is all about understanding art principles and concepts to a level where you'll be able to build intuition, speed, and mastery. And remembering is about committing all that knowledge to your long-term memory so you can access it in real-life situations. As an artist, these are the skills you need to invest in so you can improve fast. So now that you know how to boost your focus, you're going to have to practice. And we've all been told, just practice, blah, 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 blah. But in my next video, I'm going to tell you how artists can really practice effectively and efficiently. See you next time.